as a box on which we have an input and an output. The input with the previous experience, the previous data, the output becoming a recommendation based on a new kind of case that we could find. If we are identifying pictures of cats and dogs, if we are doing a forecast for numerical data, whatever, right? But now we are getting a mix. That kind of intelligence is getting exponential, in the sense that when you are launching a process on Cloud Cowork, for example, it's launching different agents in parallel. They become the input and the output. That output becomes the input on the next one, or they work in parallel, and then abilities. Now, the evolution, you already know it. We started on this industry with mostly research activities, I'll say, and a very famous conference, the Conference of Dartmouth in the United States, on which different researchers were getting together, and they were starting with the idea of thinking machines and the idea of artificial intelligence. And then we have, and this is why I'm explaining this, then we have different decades in which we have what we call the winters and the summers of artificial intelligence, which is the moments of hype and then the disappointment. Which means that when we were having high expectations, at some moment we realized that we cannot accomplish what we were thinking we could accomplish with AI, and then all the funding from the companies, the governments, etc., is gone. But in the 90s, we already had different applications, mostly based on machine learning, for prediction of numerical information, for classification. We won't go into details, but we could see already on the finance, on the insurance, and certain industries, some applications that were bringing a return on investment. And that idea of creating an application that will justify the cost based on the revenue is very important from the AI project manager perspective. And then on the 2010s, on the modern 10s, we had this wave of deep learning. It didn't start there, but when we started to get like a huge boom, because deep learning models, neural networks were working very well for image classification and different tasks, etc., we started to see a phenomena, a very interesting one. All innovations from the labs, the research labs, move very quickly to the companies. If you have like a great innovation for image recognition, then a couple of years after or 3 years after, you will have it here on your phone, because it's the way to unlock your phone with your face, right? Something like that. So that pattern of research to productization changed radically, and it was just a few years of difference between the first step and the last step. Now with generative AI, we are seeing things that are going in months. No, OpenAI, Anthropic, any kind of company may be developing something and testing for a few months, and then they're released to a market. The second reason why I explain this is because you, as an AI project manager, or whatever role it is but related to managing the AI project, you need to keep in mind that idea of mature versus experimental technologies. At this point, you start to develop that kind of intuition, right? You have models that are something that will last maybe a few months, and they are going to be replaced by other models, and some models that are mature enough to continue using them and to leverage them in our systems. They'll have consideration in terms of performance, of the cost of the models, you know the tokenomics, the consideration in terms of maintenance and life cycle when you need to replace your models when you are developing a solution, and then after 2 months after the final release, you need to replace the models that you are getting from Amazon Bedrock, from Microsoft Azure, etc., etc. And this is something that that kind of high-level perspective that you need to keep in mind, because in general, within the teams, you won't always get that kind of thinking. Now, the way I'll explain the different stages and the project management approach goes way earlier in time, like way before the actual execution of the project. We'll have the execution of the development of the project. Your role as an AI project manager will be to anticipate the potential risk of the best applications, to select the best use cases way before we start. So it's the initial ideation, and then we are going to the completion, and we are going to delivery, of course. So once again, the idea of choosing the best potential projects, ensuring that you have the proper resources. I have been in a lot of great projects. The ideas were amazing, but then we didn't have the people or the infrastructure or we're working with companies that didn't use cloud computing, and they had like the private servers, but the private servers didn't have any GPU, so they couldn't run any kind of deep learning model, etc., etc. And by the end of the day, what you are doing is reducing the potential risk, because there is always a risk of failure in these kind of projects. Now, I always keep this reference on the left that was talking about artificial intelligence in 2020 and even before. And we have been talking about this movement from AI to buzzwords to solutions and whatnot. The thing is that kind of excitement and attention that you'll get from the executives and from your companies, that's great news, because you can get a lot of funding, you can get support when you need more people on your projects, you can get the tools and the resources that you need in order to handle your projects. But at the same time, that attention will be constant and people will get excited, they'll be worried if you don't provide some updates. So you need to combine a series of skills that will make you be successful as an interface of different stakeholders. Of course, the project management skills, managing team members, deliverables, the budget, the different stakeholders, that's a core thing that you need to do. If you have the experience, that's great. If you are a technical AI person, as you were saying before, and you haven't done project management, you will be developing those skills. Then the idea of agility and experimentation. No, there will be a certain moment you are working on your backlog and you have your to-do list, and then suddenly you are in the middle of a cycle or a sprint and something changes. Or you're experimenting with an AI model from one provider and comparing to another, and finally you realize that you need to change the implementation. Or if you are not using generative AI models and you are working on the machine learning, deep learning mode, you need to train models and you will have different iteration experimentation. So this idea of we don't know what will happen, because it's a bit of science, not only engineering, you need to handle that because you have clients asking for results, stakeholders putting some funding with the hope of getting results. So that's some pressure that you will get, but if you have a gracious way to handle it, you will be able to manage these projects. And again, I mentioned before, you need to have the technical skills. I'm not saying that an AI project manager needs to be a super expert, but some level of literacy. And now, because you have that, you will be able to explain the results of the rationale, the results of certain models. Even for a simple generative AI implementation, if you are doing a chatbot, which is a classic case, you could explain why a chatbot is hallucinating and showing a wrong result based on your understanding of how LLMs work, for example. And then it's very important, especially today, because we are talking about AI models that are difficult to quantify on the number of tokens, number of iterations, creating scenarios of how much of those models we'll use every day with our clients based on different estimations. But that has an impact on the cost. And then when it has an impact on the cost, you need to translate the business case into potential return investment. So that's another part that you need to handle. So we are going to highly technical things to very business kind of things. And you are bringing all that together. And then all the human aspects of any kind of new implementation, innovation, change management. No one likes to use new tools if they don't understand the rationale, or expectation management during the implementation. So all that together is a bit of a representation of what you will be handling as your area of work as an AI project manager. Now, I mentioned that I won't be focusing on the traditional AI life cycles, but just high-level information for those who say that they are from project management, but they don't have the experience, or the people who are not project managers and they are not AI experts. But basically, when we're talking about a life cycle, you have something like this. You have something that is born based on a current need, a business opportunity, and then you are working one way or the other on the data work to prepare the data, all the information, to create the pipelines, to aggregate the data, combine information from different sources, clean it, etc., etc. And then the modeling part. No, if you are training the models because it's not a pre-trained model, then you are selecting the features, the functionalities, and then you are evaluating and then you are leveraging the data you have used as an input for the model training. And this, of course, changes with generative AI, in which probably you will be mostly combining the data that you have, like a knowledge base, a SharePoint, with all the answers that you want the chatbot to leverage, and the models. And they are basically being combined. So there is no like a training process there, except if you do some kind of fine tuning. Let's not go into details. And then you have the deployment. No? You are finalizing, you have a deployment, monitoring over time, whatnot. This life cycle is fine. The only thing that I don't like is that we start and we end as something that is, a complete iteration. In general, we'll have endless iterations because we need to maintain the AI implementations once we have completed the first version. I'll explain that later. And here I'll just keep some different visuals. Here is a version in which you have more of a UI designer. But let's start already with the methodology that I bring here and that you can find on the Managing AI Projects book that I shared earlier and that you can find on the platform. This EMED methodology is something that we ideated based on the experience. And basically I say, okay, we have 4 phases. We have the first phase is called exploration, and it serves as a typical one. No? We are exploring possibilities. We are discussing different use cases or potential projects with different stakeholders, and we need to figure out the criteria and the rationale to prioritize one or the others, how we can go into the technical details, into the business consideration, into the resources that we have or we don't have. And we are able to make a decision that is informed, and maybe we are filtering the worst options because we don't have, the resources, or we don't have anything. Sorry, I just saw a comment from Dante on the chat. I cannot see your presentation. I believe if you press F5, you will refresh and rejoin. You should be able to see the presentation, hopefully. For the rest, I assume that you are seeing the slides that I'm presenting, hopefully. So yeah, just refresh. It should take just a couple of seconds. So we're saying, okay, we have the exploration. Imagine at some moment we make the decision and we say, okay, we have made a decision. This is the best project that we can do. And before we start with the project, we have the mobilization. Mobilization is something that initially wasn't like a proper project stage because we still don't have the resources, right? We don't have the people involved. We don't have a project structure. We haven't started. But I realized over the years that making the most as an AI project manager, if you are already sure that you are gonna lead that project, if you leverage that time to make sure that you have the people that are required to consolidate and to adjust the technical approach, if you have an idea of the data sources that you need, the data sources that you are missing, if you can work with your team to define the infrastructure needs, of course, that will have an impact also on the procurement side or the access from the cloud perspective. If you need to talk to your admins to get access to new models and whatnot. But getting to work on that before we start the project will minimize the potential risk because then you will start with the best possible scenario. Now, usually we'll have some issues. We won't have everything that we need. I'll explain that later. But that idea of mobilization as a proper phase, I think that's very important. And then we imagine we have decided the project, we have all the resources, and we have a kickoff date, and we are starting, let's say, next week. And we start with the execution phase, right? And the idea there is very simple in the sense that is about how much we can implement and deliver while we are also experimenting. Sometimes we need to experiment and to have iterations. I work with data scientists to train different branches of a model and different versions of the model based on different data sets or based on different parameters. Or if I'm doing like a more of a generative AI implementation, I have models from Anthropic, from OpenAI, different models. Maybe I'm trying to do some iterations to see which one will work with the lower cost. So that idea of experimentation, implementation is always the tension that we have on these kind of projects and any other complex implementation. And then by the end of the day, hopefully we deliver a project. It could be an internal delivery. We are creating a solution for our company, or if you are working a service, professional service company, you are delivering that to another organization. But there is a way to do that in an organized way, to pre-agree on the deliverables, to make sure that everything looks very good, because it's always important to deliver in a gracious way, so we'll show better what we have done in the third phase. Now, if I was in a room, I was just discussing this with different people, or if it was like a physical classroom, I'll ask how much you think that exploration and the mobilization account for the importance, like what the relative importance of these two phases. For me, it's like the 60 or the 70%, because if I'm able to carry these two phases in a proper way, then I'm reducing the risk step by step, is going sprint by sprint, or before we start the sprint. And then we're arriving with that optimal scenario, or close to optimal scenario, on which we have already filtered the bad projects. And trust me, there are a lot of people with bad ideas. And then the idea of missing any kind of resource that's required for that project. So keep that in mind. Obviously, execution is important, but especially today, in which we have this idea of AI builders, in which we can augment our capabilities and develop in an easier way. I think that the problem is mostly on the collaboration approaches, but also on the exploration and mobilization. Perfect. Let me just move here, and let's start with exploration, also known as the capacity to evaluate and choose the best use cases. Let me just put it here. This is something that I remind myself all the time. It's not necessarily AI, it's about company strategy. But imagine you're working with a client, and those clients are airlines, right? Because they are very illustrative examples. And I always say, like, hey, if I was working with Ryanair or France, Qatar Airways, American Airlines, whatever, obviously I kind of propose, if I'm in charge of proposing or creating a proposal, no, for a new AI project, I kind of choose the same kind of project for Ryanair or for another company. You don't know, Ryanair is a low-cost organization in Europe, in Ireland. And for that, I use, well, it's just the Porter framework here of the competitive strategies on the left, but basically the idea of a company being positioned in the market in a different way. They can be different. Maybe they are like Apple, no? It's a certain differentiation because they are different compared to other technology companies. Or maybe they are cheaper, right? If you have something that is cheaper, that's a way to compete on the market. Or maybe you are fully focused on one specific segment of the market. So my point here is that if you say, hey, I'm working with Ryanair, being a low-cost company, and I want to propose a project, probably I'll say something like, hey, let's find a project that will help optimize the cost or increase the revenue so we can improve the margins, right? Is the financial aspect is the most important. But if we are talking about Qatar Airways, that I like a lot, as an airline, usually is more focused on the experience. I could create something that is a customized experience. And if I like to drink Porto wine every time I'm taking a flight with them, maybe based on the historical information, you can have a prediction of the most likely choice. When I join the flight, they can proactively say, hey, Adrian, based on your last information, we think that you may enjoy a Porto wine, right? And it could be something that feels exclusive, that is an experience that you can create. And this is all feasible with AI technologies. And obviously you have other kind of organization, it will be different. But the reason why I explain this is that every time I'm starting a new exploration with an organization, I tend to forget this, that any AI project needs to be aligned with the overall strategy of a company. Why? Well, mostly because it's the bonus of the executive on those organizations. If they feel that this will impact positively their end of year bonus, they will be likely to support the initiative. They will help you if you have a problem. If there's a blocker, they will unlock it. If you need more resources, probably they will be more likely to help. So just keep that in mind. Very high level still, but just for you to know. And then I like this representation. It was like an article some years ago, Boston Consulting Group, in which they were saying, okay, what's the idea of AI success sophistication, right? But mostly for the AI success. And they were explaining that it's a mix of obviously the knowledge or the complexity, the intellectual property of what we are creating, and then the notion of adoption. And this is very related to my experiences as an AI project manager. If you develop something that is very good, but then by the end of the day it's not adopted, totally useless. That's not success. It's just something that it won't be adopted. The opposite, if you develop something that maybe is not perfect, it's not as good, but it's been adopted and the expectations are clear, maybe it can be called a success. In my case, I have participated in projects that were technology marvel, but then they weren't adopted because the expectations with the stakeholders, with the client, weren't clear in the beginning. And then finally, no one used that solution. And I had other projects that were pretty basic. They were good enough, but they were happily adopted because it was exactly what they were looking for. So that's also part of your responsibility as an AI project manager, is to align the expectations and to guarantee that kind of adoption. And when I'll be talking about change management and technical metrics of performance and stuff, we'll be coming back to this idea of aligning the expectations, because you play a central role on that task. Now, in this exploration, forget about the image on the left. I just to identify the steps that we are covering is how we choose the proper problems, opportunities, and how do we pre-identify the data sources. So basically here you see the green and the orange. And then what I'll show you is what we have on the right is my recommended approach. Is my own way to structure this. And what you'll see is that the visuals are pretty basic. They are simple tables, cheap material that you can use, adapt, remove, delete, ignore if you don't need it. But I like to keep that complexity out of the project. I want to make things simple, because when you are working on AI projects, again, because of the attention and all the different interactions you have with the stakeholders, people, even if they don't admit that, but they get a bit afraid of the complexity of the AI implementation. They don't understand the full details. So at least for this phase, what we try to keep things is very simple, so everyone can participate and they can give you the inputs you need in order to go and select or help guide the selection of the best AI projects. Because as an AI project manager, you don't want to be part of a failed project, right? This is part of your career portfolio. So let's start with the first step. I'll follow the list that you have here from A to G, and let's start with the first step. Here, this table, the idea is that you are sitting in a room or you are doing a discovery workshop. Sometimes I do that with organizations, and then we are talking to different people, and then you are just trying to listen, right? Like, what are your ideas if you are on the finance department, the marketing department, supply chain department of an organization? What are your ideas for a project? What would you do? And then let me just share the screen. Maybe it will be easier if I show you a live example. And keep in mind, when I'm sharing the actual screen, I cannot see if you are commenting something, but I'll come back to this. So basically, let me just use my Google Slides. So I'm working with the different stakeholders. I mentioned the marketing department, and maybe they say, okay, I want an internal case because I want to understand my clients, right? And you are the AI project managers, and you say, okay, that sounds like a customer segmentation, a typical implementation that we have with marketing. And what we use in this case, you need to develop that kind of awareness. It's not generative AI, it's not NLP, it's not any other. In this case, what we are using is machine learning clustering techniques. If you are missing that kind of background to make this decision yourself or to propose the kind of technical approach, you can go to the book I recommend, the Managing AI Projects. And there is a chapter, I believe this is the second one, that says Deep Dive of AI for Project Managers. I'll be explaining in that book the different kind of techniques. Okay, we have this, and we are already developing some experience and intuition. Otherwise, we are asking to our team members, data scientists or engineers, how they will be explaining. Okay, we have that. Then I go to the head of finance, and the head of finance saying, I want to have a very typical case, which is just the financial forecast. Every year we want to do a forecast for the next year, and we have information about the past 4 years, and I can give you that information to you create some kind of forecast. In that case, you say, okay, this is machine learning also, but it's a different kind of model. This is a regression model. The kind of regression, we can go into details depending on the application, but in this case, we're talking about regression model. And maybe you have operations. I'll conclude with the non-generative AI cases. You have operations, and they have an image classification need that they are reviewing, who knows, like physical spaces, and they're reviewing just to detect some kind of defect. And you say, okay, visual inspection, visual recognition is highly related to deep learning techniques, and your engineers and data scientists are confirming that. And you say, okay, what we need here is a classification, and it can be like a binary classification or a multi-class classification, but any case is something that that will be deep learning and whatnot. And then you have the typical case, you have the customer service support department, and they're telling you that they have an external case, something that will interact with the users. And it's a chatbot, simply to answer questions and whatnot. And you say, okay, that sounds like it could be implemented, obviously, with generative AI, with large language models. And okay, you have that first exploration. And you could have many others. Now, from an AI project manager perspective, when you hear this, you start to make sense of, okay, the kind of needs that your stakeholders will have. And it could be several projects from the same department. It doesn't need to be like different departments. And then you start to develop the intuition of what kind of technology or technical approach we'll have. Will it be something more machine learning, deep learning, NLP, pure automation, LLMs, whatever, right? And my intuition from the AI project management perspective is, okay, if I'm saying that I'm going to implement a machine learning model, I want to make sure that first we have the resources, that second, human resources in this case, the people who will be able to implement that if we are training models, we have enough data, so we'll be very data-centric, right? Because non-pre-trained models will require like a specific training with a specific data set. And then I need to understand if I have the infrastructure. You say, okay, machine learning models require less computing power. Maybe we don't need even GPUs, so we are fine. We have the infrastructure. Or if not, we leverage the cloud infrastructure that we have. So you start thinking high level. By imagine you say, okay, the deep learning part, we have never done that. At this point, it's not rocket science. Before, it was a bit more difficult. We know that there are like frameworks and libraries that we can leverage, and we can have pre-trained models or packetized models on the, on SageMaker or Foundry or Vertex or any kind of platform. And maybe it will be feasible, but some people will need some training, no? So you start to think about the human resources and their relation with the training needs if they haven't done that before. And the chatbot, for example, you will be thinking about the considerations. It's an external use case, so you need to add different things to the roadmap, evaluation stages that usually are not fully necessary when it's an internal use case. Okay, so we have that. Then we say, okay, for the same cases here, I'll keep the same set of examples. Let's talk about the impact. The potential impact, right? We are not doing a thesis here, a master thesis or a PhD, but it's just the high-level impact. If we are saying, okay, we are doing customer segmentation, maybe you are discussing with the departments and they explain, okay, maybe, if we are segmenting the different customers that we have in the organization, we understand their needs, we can propose better offering, and they will be buying more, and therefore this will increase the revenue with a better prospection of these clients. And the KPI will be, increased amount of money per client. And again, you come back to the idea of, okay, this makes sense. It seems that we have a financial opportunity here, but do we have the talent? Yes. Okay, we have data scientists. Do we have the budget? Yes. We have the approval for the cloud platform. Do we have a sponsor, an executive sponsor? Yes, we have the head of marketing. Perfect. And maybe you say, okay, let's say the image classification case. we are saying that the goal is to automate the analysis. And maybe we are reducing a little bit, a tiny bit, the cost. You ask the questions as a project manager, okay, but how many times you are reviewing this, the visual inspection, in a human way per day? And maybe they're telling you 4 times. Maybe when you are calculating the cost, the human cost versus the actual cost of the AI, it's not changing that much. And you are saying, okay, maybe we can scale if we need to do more inspections per day. That could be an advantage. But from the financial perspective, I don't think that will work. Maybe they tell you, yeah, but we are reducing the cost 80%, and you start to think about these considerations. Okay, so we have an very high level analysis of the potential use cases projects. Who is asking for that? The approach, technical approach, it will be internal and external, to know the notion of risk related to that. The value, the business value with the KPIs. In this case, we are talking about business KPIs. Later, I'll be talking about technical KPIs. KPIs as metrics that we'll use to quantify value or technical performance. And we are making sure that at least we are thinking upfront about resources. Obviously, it's never that simple. We need to engage in discussions and go and fight for people to work on this project because, you know, sometimes we'll have competitive priorities within the organizations. Okay, so we have complete what we'll say is the first 2 steps here, like the business impact, ideation, creation of the list of potential cases. Let's now go to the consolidation of the list of available data sources. Regardless of the technical approach, we are talking about generative AI or not generative AI, we'll need data. And the data can have a different shape. Maybe with generative AI, we're working more with unstructured data, text-based, things that are in a SharePoint, that could be in a Google Drive, that it could be a Q&A that you have documented in a PDF file, and then you are doing a RAG, whatever, right? But if not, you're working with other kind of models, machine learning, deep learning, NLP, and you need to train these models. Regardless of the approach, you are starting to engage on the discussion with these departments, and you say, okay, give me the list, like the potential data catalog of what we have. And they will say, you know, we have a CRM, there is a dynamic, so is Salesforce, and we have the system, and you start to take notes here, right? That you have a Salesforce, and this is a specific table, customer table, whatever. And we have Adrian, who is the key contact, and if you need to connect at some moment, you can connect via API. So that's also a good indicator for you as a project manager. What kind of data we have? How are we planning to access that data? Is this something that I'll get as an extract of the information, a manual extract that someone is put in a server, or is something that I can get from an API in a programmatic way so we can integrate it with the code? Is this based on an ETL? Imagine you have a data lake, or do you have a whatever repository and you have an ETL. ETL means like the process of data integration with some batches every hour, 2 hours, you name it, right? But you are making sense of the data sources that are available. From the project manager perspective, doesn't mean that you will, I mean, in the project in general, you won't be using all of them. Maybe you have data sources that are repeat or similar, and you have client information in one and the other, and you need to choose, or you decide to merge them, to aggregate, etc., etc. But you start to develop that intuition. So you have data, and you have the use cases, right? So that's the third step. Now, when you want to do like a data-driven approach, I'll call it, what you will do is a mapping. See, you have the different data sources that we're talking about, and you have the different use cases. You try to map it, and I'll explain this in a visual way, even if it's a bit difficult to understand. That's why I'm explaining this here. We have the data sources on the left, and forget about the other cases. Imagine we are in a manufacturing company, and we have the sensor data, the work orders, the technician credentials, the weather, the traffic, whatever. You have different data sources. And then you have your different use cases, improving anomaly detection, reducing the inventory cost, whatever that means, right? And you are saying, okay, if you use what you see, these little black balls, is just to illustrate that the data is present and available for a specific use case. If you have dot or a check mark, and you are saying, okay, I have this data for this use case, and I have this data, this is good, and this one in yellow is to confirm, and you're trying to create that kind of consolidated inventory based on the idea of the use cases. So maybe for improving the maintenance effectiveness, I will need sensor data, but I don't have it. Simply as that, I have very little sensor data. We are starting to collect it now. So that will be an indicator, very high level still, of a data-driven approach to filter your projects and to say, maybe the other projects that don't have the data that is required, they are not the best candidate. And what happened here is that you are saying, okay, then I have 3 potential candidates, but still you need to engage on the discussion with different departments or different stakeholders. Let's imagine that now instead of manufacturing, we are talking about marketing. No? This could be use cases for marketing. And or we can have the use cases that we're talking about here, right? And we are basically playing with the classic 2x2 matrix. This is a bit businessy, but well, it's a good visual. And then as an AI project manager, you will be facing different opinions and different stakeholders who want to position the projects. Some of them there will be good ideas, some of them will be like less good ideas, but people compete to have this kind of priority when we are implementing new projects. And maybe you say, okay, I'm evaluating, I want to quantify and to explain the rationale why we are choosing one or the other. We have pre-prioritized these 3 projects, and we can argue that the others are not feasible because we don't have data. But if we have this, maybe we say, okay, improving anomaly detection. Well, we can use anomaly detection models. We have the data that we need, so it's highly feasible. And like we're justifying the business value because we will avoid any kind of issue that comes after the anomaly. So that's highly justified. Maybe optimizing the performance yield, whatever that means, is lower business value, lower implementation feasibility, and you are deciding with stakeholders, and you say is here. And maybe improving repair readiness, it can be something that is feasible from a technical perspective, but maybe has lower business value. So you see these kind of dimensions. In this case, what this is giving you is the ability as an AI project manager, and this is what you do, is to guide the decision, to illustrate things, to semi-quantify things. So you are positioning basically the projects that in the best of your abilities, and also with discussions with different people involved, you consider that will have less risk. And that's why we say we are trying to filter potential use cases that are not feasible because we are checking the technical approach and the data that we have and whatnot. Now, when we are doing that, it doesn't mean that the other projects are bad. No, in general, as an AI project manager, you need to keep in mind the long-term vision. If I have a team who will continue working with me after the project, if I have data sources that I can leverage for the other projects, if I have infrastructure that we are deploying for the first time on the first project and maybe we will leverage later, what I try to create is what we call a inter-use case roadmap. And let me just come back to the other view so I can see your faces. Let me just move the slides so I can show the proper information. I'll be there. And you have examples on the material that we'll be sharing with you after the session. But we're saying we have that. And then we have different good ideas, because in general, we can have different good ideas with the notion of priority. We try to create the inter-use case roadmap, which is basically me as an AI project manager thinking the first project that we'll be implementing, and then the potential second one and the potential third one. Why? Because when we'll be analyzing the resources and the cost of a project, the idea of, I don't know if this is a good term, but we could say economy of scale, right? Like the idea of leveraging things that get cheaper over time. If we are saying that it's the same team, they will become more productive. If it's the same data sources, we have already worked on the data sources to prepare them. If it's the same infrastructure, it's already ready for the second project. So we will try to find the use case, the first one and the second one, that converge the most. That will be easier to transition from one to the other, because by the end of the day, we'll be more efficient. As a team, we'll be able to deliver potentially the second use case faster compared to the situation where we'll just develop the second use case up front. because we have developed that kind of team experience. So just keep in mind this, because when we'll be talking about the delivery phase by the end of the session, I'll come back to this idea of inter-use case roadmap. Okay, so we have that. What else? This is the way, and there are different ways, okay, to analyze the detail of the data. Because before we were talking about, okay, we have the list of data sources, and we know the data sources that are more or less available to specific use cases. But how can we quantify how available or good data sources are for a specific use case? This template is what I have been using, adapting from different quality factors. You see in the data governance and data management world, there are quality factors that help quantify what a good quality or bad quality is, because that's very high level, right? And in this case, what we are saying is we have different data sources. Imagine I have been working with my team. We have been analyzing the potential data sources. We have chosen one specific use case, is improving anomaly detection in this case. And we are saying, okay, we have the API data. We have a database that may be something related to the internal systems. We have data lake. We have a second database. We have a variety of systems, right? And for each of them, we start to analyze. Volume meaning like a amount of information, right? But in this case, it's not about getting as much data as we want. Is getting the amount of data we need depending on the use case. If I'm trying to do a seasonal prediction, for example, for financial forecast, I need several years to understand the seasonality and then create a forecast that may work depending on the situation, but yeah, it may work based on the past experience. If I'm training an image recognition model, I need enough samples of cats and dogs in order to be able to predict what a picture of a cat or the dog, detecting the animals, will be. So keep in mind that we're talking about volume referring to the actual use case. And maybe we realize that the 6 data source, for some reason, we have less information that we require. We can come back to that later. Then we have the joinability. And to be honest, I don't know if that's even a word, because in Spanish, Spanish speaking, I don't know how I'll call that in Spanish, but it's the ability to join different things, right? And if we have different informations, imagine we're talking about information about our clients, and we have the CRM and internal database. How can we join that information? Is with the client ID? Is with a key parameter on the database? Do we have that ability that is totally isolated from the reality of the different data sources? And maybe you have also the relevance. When we were analyzing different data sources, maybe we overestimated what we actually need. And maybe we don't need the first database and the second database because they have like very similar kind of information, and we just need to select one of them. So in this case, you see relevance. It could be that you have duplicated information, or it could be that after that initial research, you realize that you don't need that database, and you say, okay, relevance 1, we can keep that data as archive. We are not using that, and we are not spending time of our team to analyze that data. Consistency is another one that is, imagine you have a CRM and you have your company have been doing migrations of the different CRMs, and the data looks more or less similar, but you know, the shape of the columns and the values and how things are being tracked are not consistent. And then you realize that you need to transform some information to make valid the last 2 years of information compared to the other previous 2 years. So that's something that can happen. And that happens all the time, no? Especially on that concept of migrations, when you have different systems and we have been tracking information in a different way. What else? We can have the clarity. It happened to me in big organizations when I could get access to data sources, but I cannot understand what data sources are. Imagine on telecommunications, numerical information that is being tracked automatically. People who are retiring, they cannot explain what's the meaning of the values within the database. We don't have even a data catalog explaining or a dictionary explaining the idea of the different columns that we have, and we don't have the clarity and we cannot use it, right? That could happen. It's a more basic one, but it could happen. And then the timeliness is basically the refresh, what we call the data refresh. If you have a data source that is very interesting, but then you realize that you are getting that data every day and you need it every 2 hours, or you are creating something real time with the alerts from social media and you don't get the information real time. Therefore, you are like missing that kind of timeliness. What I use this is to recommend actions. If I'm working with the technical departments and we are still preparing things, we are just making sure that we have everything before we start our project. Then I give recommendations or I ask the questions. Hey, this data source looks perfect. It could be the data source database 2, right? As example 2. It looks perfect, but we need more refresh. Is this possible? And maybe they'll tell you, yes, it's possible because we haven't done it like that because of the cost, but if there is a justification, we can do it. So thank you for the recommendation. Or maybe you have something on the 7th example in which the joinability is not very good, but you can transform the data source and you can aggregate another column and you can find ways to make it work, right? So this is a way to actually go into details and to figure out which data sources will be more useful for your use case. Okay. I feel like, I'm just taking the time. What we can do here, if you want, we'll take a little pause. Let me just find the slide with the timer. And basically, what we'll do is taking 7 minutes, I think. And I'll see you in 7 minutes and we'll continue with the mobilization phase. Okay. You can go and take some water, some tea, some coffee, or any kind of beverage you prefer. So see you in 7 minutes. And Brittany, you could please help me put the timer because right now I cannot see the rest of the slides. That would be amazing. Lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, we are back. I can see the screen's already sharing. Thank you for that, Brittany. I identify where to change the timer for next time. Thank you. So we are back and we'll continue with the mobilization phase. Just to say, I'm receiving some invitations here on LinkedIn and all. So thank you for that. Happy to connect. I'll just give you again the link if you want to send other invitations. Be happy to connect after the training. And once again, you have the uh, Managing AI Projects book that I have been referring to, so you can take a look, and it will include deep dives on different aspects that we are covering today. Perfect. So let's imagine we have been exploring already. We have been talking to the different stakeholders. We are aligning things. We are saying basically like we have the use case. We are convinced. We believe that is something that is feasible, something that will bring value to all of us. And now we are in this moment in which we are about to start, but this about to start could be like next week, or it could be in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks. I had because they didn't have the resources and the people and the budget. So, in any case, keep in mind that this mobilization phase can be pretty long. And the idea of this is that you need to probably make the most of this phase to prepare and to make sure that you have the resources, as we previously mentioned. So it's all about this. Now, how I structure my analysis of the resources or the different, you want like a checklist kind of analysis. The first part is the scientific approach. We have been talking about project and use cases that were machine learning, deep learning, NLP, generative AI, you name it. But confirming exactly the kind of approach I will use, the kind of models that we'll leverage, if it's something that our team will be developing, if it's something that we are getting from, I don't know, cloud providers, if it's something that we are getting from one supplier or the other, that's something that we need to define here. We need to be very clear about what we need if we are trying to implement this. And obviously, we have considerations on the data sources. Once again, not the same when you have a pre-trained model or you need to train a model. The data sources will be different, but you have the data sources that you need and the quality and the shape that you need, what we were showing a few minutes ago, and with the availability, no? Because maybe we have very good data sources, but then they are finally not available, and then we cannot use them. So that's an important one. The infrastructure obviously is also correlated to the kind of use cases that we have and the kind of data that we'll be crunching. If we need cloud infrastructure on premise, if we need one provider or the other, whatever it is, you need to have these discussions on this phase with your technical team. And maybe you can arrive to situations on which all these implementations or the platform itself is something new for everyone. So you are making the first decision with the team. And then obviously you need the human resources, meaning the people, the talent, the capabilities. And we'll be talking about that later, but maybe you realize that you have enough people in your team and it's a matter of upskilling, or maybe you need to find external people who are joining the team to help make sense of the project, etc., etc. So that could happen. And then by the end of the day, the definition of impact. Obviously, we're talking about the business impact, the quantification, the metric, the return on investment. Sometimes it goes more on the macro level. I remember working on some projects in Canada, and they were funded by the Canadian government, and we had to quantify, or at least to create scenarios of the potential impact at the scale for the society, for the people, for whatever, right? And that's something that you need to keep in mind. That justification of the different levels of impact is something that is part of your job. And then because we haven't started the project, but we need to start thinking about the technical aspects or the equipment that you will have, you will be thinking in terms of required infrastructure, tooling and environments, data sources, and people and skills that we mentioned, but in two horizons. And I always do this. You can think in terms of the MVP and the prototype, or maybe you are training initially models, and then you can think on the long term. Usually these resources will change over time. Why? Because if I'm training a model, I need more computing capacity, more GPUs than what I need on the inference phase. And if I I'm developing things, and we have a team, and I have different roles involved and whatnot. These people will be involved during the development, but probably they will move to another project during the other phases. But you still need to keep some expertise within the team to take care of these projects. So basically, what I'm saying here is we have the checklist, but at the same time, we need to be analyzing this on the short and the long term. Now, sometimes what happens all the time at this point of the project is that we are talking about data sources, and from the list that I was showing you before, maybe we have the 80% of data sources, and maybe we can start the project with those data sources, and we can say, okay, we don't have the other data sources. We're planning to develop two competing approaches. One model with machine learning, one model with deep learning, but for the same purpose, just to quantify the improvement, potential improvement, because we assume that deep learning will give better results. And, we don't have that additional data for now. Maybe we can start accumulating that during the next months. And when we have enough data, we can implement the second approach, right? So that happens all the time. And you need to navigate these kind of things. And once again, for people and required skills, confirming the calendar depending on your planning cycle. For example, in my case at Microsoft, we do it every 2 months, and we need to decide, okay, what's the amount of work that we have planned, and then what's the amount of people and the kind of skills that we need in order to make something happen. Or if someone is already almost ready, 99%, but they need additional training or experience or experimentation just to be able to implement the task. So you need to make sure that these aspects are already contemplated when we are talking about this. Now, there's a template, like a visual, simple chip template that I use is what you see on the screen. I'll come back to this later on the third part of the training, because basically when we are creating the project roadmap and you estimate the duration of the activities, even if it's high level, we start to see in a very intuitive way the kind of people that we'll need and the level of effort. And keep that in mind, level of effort versus a full-time employee. If I'm saying that I need the first person, who is in this case a cloud engineer, and she will be available 20% of the time, that means that she will be available average 1 day per week, right? And we know that maybe she is working there on Mondays. And when we are talking about the engineer and developer, you see that we have two different people who will have Python and OpenAI skills and whatnot. And one person will be 50% of their time, so that means 2.5 days. And the other person will be 10% of their time, which is half a day compared to a regular week. And in that case, it's because that person is more senior and is helping the other person accelerate things. And then you'll see a situation like the data engineer. Imagine you have the data engineer, and based on this and the roadmap that we'll create later, you realize that that person will be mostly involved from the beginning and by the end of the project. Beginning because they are preparing the pipelines, they are doing a few iterations, and then by the end of the project because they are moving things to production. And we need them in an overall estimation of the level of effort. It will be a 50% of the time for the next 3 months. And then you have other roles, of course, QA, the sponsor, the executive sponsors, you need their time, you can quantify it. Designers, that happens to me, working my projects, I need to estimate the amount of time that the designer will be working our projects. So that's something that will become more intuitive when we come back from the roadmap exercise. And yeah, exactly. Very good comment from Dennis. Look, the percentage are important, but how do we handle the sprints and the schedule? So we'll have that on the implementation phase, which is the third one. Because remember, we are in the mobilization phase. Up to now, we haven't started the project. We didn't have a kickoff. What we're trying is to guarantee that we have everything that we need. And I mean, in terms of people, we could have all kinds of roles. This is just a way to explain them, but today they are changing a lot of the roles. I can share with you from different books, O'Reilly books, the evolution of the roles that we have with generative AI. But well, basically you think about roles that will be mostly related to platform, infrastructure, roles to the data work, roles related to the use of the training of the models, any kind of other role that is for management, like yourself or any other manager within the company, QA, UI designers, pure software developers, ETCs, did you have that on the organization, etc., etc. My point here is that I have seen this huge variety of roles, mostly in consulting environments, when we are billing, the different people and the hours to a client, because in that case it's easy to happen, right? You are billing the hours. But in general terms, the evolution of the industry is to have smaller pods of people, just a few people working, maybe 1 PM, and then 2 or 3 people working with more multidisciplinary skills. So that may happen. But we'll come back to the rationale, how I estimate their involvement and how I handle exactly the sprint and the schedule. Now, one thing that is obvious, and it's not related to AI, but it's related to the idea of internal productivity, is how we choose, or we have already, making sure that we have already the proper tools for the goal and the kind of implementation that we'll have. I explain myself. I have been in companies that they had already a tool for documentation management, Confluence. They had already a board project management kind of tool like Jira, Asana, Azure DevOps, Trello, whatever. And certainly they will have a code repository. If they are working in technology, they will have GitLab, GitHub, Bitbucket, all SVNs, whatever. But it may happen as a project manager, especially for those who are now starting their careers and they are arriving to companies that the companies are pretty new to AI. It may happen that maybe they don't even have the productivity environment. And in that case, once again, it's not AI related, but you need to help the team decide the best tools. For example, I really like Jira with Confluence. And the documentation management part, that's another big learning on AI, is very important because in general, on the teams, we have a lot of rotation, right? Like data engineers, the data scientists, engineers, whatever you name it, they will have a lot of rotation because they have a lot of professional opportunities. So they will move from the company. And maybe you realize that someone didn't document the way they transform the data when they were working on different pipelines, no? So I really insist a lot, and you will see on my project management approach on the next phase, on the implementation, you will see that I categorize the documentation work because it's as important as the implementation. Now, assuming that you have that, then you have the different aspects that are part of your role related to change management, no? Like aligning expectations, I mentioned that before, the tool adoption, right? If you need to explain to a target group of users that they will be using a tool that is changing the way they work on the day-to-day. That happened to me in the past. I had to explain that, explain the rationale of the AI tool and how people will need to wake up and validate, wake up literally every morning and validate results based on the output of AI. And they have the choice to accept or to decline. And obviously all the communication tasks, I will explain that later. And this understanding of agility, you were talking about how we handle sprints and outcomes. Not all the stakeholders and clients will understand this notion of agility because they want to pay for something and they want to get an outcome. So you need to deal with that. And then something that's obvious, but training the potential users is something that has helped a lot with that idea of adoption, where we're talking about a project that will be successful because adopted. In this case, is something that helps a lot, to get the training, to help them understand the rationale. Once again, they don't need to be super experts on AI, but at least they can be understanding the rationale of the input and the output of the AI models. Perfect. Let me check here. There's different chats. Okay, I'm just following the different comments and questions. Let me just see here. This question is, no, I'll just skip to the next phase so we have more time to do the live exercise. So now we are talking about the execution phase, meaning that we have passed that exploration. We are more or less confident that we have chosen the good projects and we have made the most of the mobilization phase. We have tried the hardest just to make sure that we have the resources, and we should be in a more or less ideal kind of situation. In general, it's never perfect, but at least, hey, we have tried, and we are trying to make sure that we are not missing anything. Now, as I mentioned before, the actual challenge here is that you need to deal with this duality of experimentation versus delivery, and that's a very important one. Again, because you're working with a piece of technology that are not pure engineering, that they are also science, and you need to experiment, etc., etc. Before we start, we get a question from Ken. What's the best way to get firm commitment from resources that are not dedicated to a project? That's an excellent question. So basically, we say, okay, we'll have a team, and we have confirmed people, no? The people who are like fully involved or partially involved, but they are consolidated as the list of team members, and they are there, right? But sometimes we'll get additional help from, I don't know, like an additional developer because we need more bandwidth, or a senior person because we need them to help the most junior person that we have in the team. And the only way I have found to make sure that this help can happen is by planning in advance. This will connect with the roadmap exercise that was mentioned before. But basically, if we're able to plan in advance, even if it's hypothesis, and I'll give you example later, and then when we go to the estimation of the roles, even if it's just 2 hours per week, making sure that we get that commitment from them and their executives, that's the only way to make sure that we have the help. Because otherwise, if we don't write it down, if we don't make sure that that happens, in general, we'll have problems. Let me actually connect that now that we are talking about the execution. I'll jump and skip a few slides, and then I'll come back. But I'll bring the idea of the project kickoff. No, a project kickoff is just the beginning of the project. It's nothing like purely related to AI. But in these kind of sessions, what we are trying to do is to explain, when we are about to start a project, to explain the main idea of the project, the kind of solution that we want to develop, the plan that we'll have, what are the immediate steps, but especially the requirements that we have. What happens in general is that we arrive to this phase. Imagine I'm starting the project on Monday, today is Thursday. And maybe we didn't get the full support to get all the data sources, or maybe we didn't get confirmation of the availability of some team member from some of the executives, or maybe we didn't approve the budget to get access to the cloud infrastructure that we have from one other provider. In that case, you try to bring that to the kickoff, not to signal and to say, hey, this person didn't help, this person didn't help, but just to put it there on the screen. And if you have this kind of kickoff, in general, I have all the stakeholders, executives, different partners that we may have, the technical team, etc. I try to put it there and to make sure that everyone understands that if we don't have one data source, for example, because department A didn't share it, will have an impact. And that will connect with the idea of the roadmap that we'll be building in a few minutes. I usually show the roadmap. I'll just give you an example here because I have the template. I'll just put here. And we'll be working on a live example later. But if I have a roadmap and I have specific durations, right? Because I use this kind of easy template, it's a PowerPoint, whatever, I'll just go to the PowerPoint. Okay, I'll say, okay, if this doesn't happen, that means that the exploratory data analysis, you don't give me data, I cannot start. The exploratory data analysis will finish by the end of sprint 2, and therefore the next activities and the dependencies will be blocked until you give me the data, right? And when people see that kind of project planning, even if it's high level, if it's a pre-estimation, they start to understand the impact of not having people, infrastructure, or data, whatever it is, right? So just keep in mind that notion of the project kickoff in the context of AI. Now, one of the things I have, and then I'll go and answer your questions. I see several comments. One of the things I do, and this is, again, not specific to AI, it's more from the world of agility, is the idea of a working agreement. I don't know if you know the show Big Bang Theory. If not, you should check it. It's a classic. But remember these living agreements that Sheldon Cooper had with Leonard, who was the roommate, and they had these agreements to specify upfront what we can do, what we cannot do, how we'll sleep, how we'll eat, etc., etc. Bring that to the concept of a project. I usually do this on the sprint zero, meaning like before we start the project, maybe like the week before. There, I have discussion with the team. It's very important because we are talking about defining the collaboration mechanisms, also the communication style, the meetings that we'll have. That depending on the team, maybe they want less or more meetings. How we are actually delivering the projects, and this is important to have it upfront. For communication, I'll give you an example. Communication, I remember one of the first times I was working on a project and I define a task and I share it with the data scientist, and the task is developing or implementing an AI model for, I believe that it was for customer segmentation, for clustering. And that person was marvelous, like super good professional, but in their opinion, developing the AI project was the AI model was just developing the AI model. In my mind, but I didn't explain it properly. Okay, you develop the model, you explain the results, you document the rationale. You have done some experimentation, you explain the results and how you reach this final stage. But it wasn't clear for them, right? Because it wasn't agreed on the communication style. What were the requirements or the criteria for acceptance of this task? And AI, you can imagine how many disagreements we can have because of the complexity of the topic. So that's very important. Collaboration is another one. It's more obvious today that we are working in a hybrid world and we are collaborating remotely, and we have found another way to work. But a few years ago, I remember working with a very good data engineer. And before we start the project, he told me, hey, Adrian, I cannot join the meetings that you are setting up. We have dailies, we have retros and whatnot. But he explained, I cannot because simply I'm not sleeping during the night because he just had a kid. And he said, like, I'm taking care of the kid, but I can work in parallel, I can develop. And then in the morning, I can share the update with you, and maybe you as a PM can share that information with the rest of the colleagues, and then asynchronously we can figure it out. And that's a very ad hoc way to work. Doesn't mean that it will work with everyone, depending on their ability or attitude, etc. But what happened is that it actually worked. No? And he said that in advance, we made it work. We had this collaboration agreement, and we knew that this person wasn't present during the meetings, but he was delivering in a very serious way. So once again, keep this in mind. Spend some time. It's not AI related, but the complexity of the project required this kind of alignment. Let me just check other comments and questions that we are getting here. Okay, two very good comments from Dennis. Sorry, I was reading. Can we actually spec what we want up front and then go iteratively and experimenting on the way? Yes. So basically, obviously, like we have a product specification, assuming that it's more of a product manager kind of role, or depending on the organization, someone who is managing a project at product level, or a product owner. We will specify what we want to do, right? But we'll go into details when we are basically creating the backlog and analyzing the details of things with the team. We'll be cutting in small pieces, and the small pieces are a sequence of the steps, and it may include iterations, something that is good in the beginning and very good and extraordinary later, right? We are doing this kind of iterations. So that's fine. Now, one of the biggest learnings I got by working with scientists kind of roles, especially more than engineers, it was that in general, we work in iterations. Imagine we are developing a model and we develop the first iteration is 87% of performance for a F1 score, which is a technical metric in the case. And then the data scientists will tell you, okay, if I work one more week, I can reach 90%, no, of a F1 score. And you say, okay, we still have some margin. And then when you reach 90, they will tell you, okay, if we spend 2 more days, 92. If we spend, and maybe we arrive to 95, and then it's exponential, no, the amount of time that we need to spend in order to make it happen. So my point is that the only way I have seen, or the only way I have been able to manage that uncertainty and to quantify what experimentation means is to plan that upfront. By that, I mean, I can plan an activity. Imagine it's developing the AI model, no? It's a machine learning implementation. And maybe we are saying that we have two weeks, no? But then I'm going granular and sitting with the team members, and I'm planning the iteration roadmap. It's like a double click, no? Like an iteration roadmap. And I say, okay, we have 2 weeks. Let's figure out together how many iterations you can do. What's the nature of the iteration? Are you improving the data set? Are you maybe, I don't know, changing the model? You are changing the parameters. You're configuring a different way. And you try to get the rationale. And then you try to negotiate or to see what's the realistic duration of the iterations. If it's changing parameters, maybe it doesn't take that much time. But it will take time to run the model, the training of the model. If it's changing the data, well, it has like some dependency with the people who will be improving the data, or it will take some time of manual effort. And so you try to define that upfront, and then on the roadmap that we'll create later, you specify it so you avoid this kind of eternal experimentation, because we can always do better, right? And at the same time, you have the client or the stakeholder, no, on the other side, and they're saying, okay, you need to deliver. It's good that you experiment, but at some moment you need to deliver. You have a choice. So you need to find that kind of balance. And the best way is to quantify that upfront. Let me check, because I changed the order of the slides. You will get the material and you'll see a bit different, but that's totally fine because it's the same. I'm just going back to explain a bit of the high level, no? When we were talking, then I'll come back to the rest of questions. When we were talking about methodologies and we were talking about project management, I don't know, we had like a 50% of people, I don't remember the numbers, who are coming from a PM perspective. So you have already this experience. In general, I try to combine 80% of agile approaches with 20% of waterfall. And waterfall is usually related to the idea of delivering something in time with a specific fixed time horizon. We are saying that the project will be, like 3 months long. We'll have 3 months, and we have some internal deliveries, the half of the project, 1 month and a half, etc. So you are basically saying, okay, we have 2 specific stages, 1 month and a half, and then 3 months. And then you need to respect that. And that's something that is a requirement from the clients. We don't have the way to skip it, and you need to play with that. But then you are handling things in a more, in the day-to-day, you're handling things in a more agile way. And in general, and I explained the combination of methodologies that I use, you have a Scrum methodology in which you are working based on sprints. And these sprints are amount of time that you are planning up front and to work on different iterations. You have the next 2 weeks, you plan for the next 2 weeks, and then you finish something, you analyze, and then you replan other 2 weeks. So something I do, and I haven't included the visual here, but it's usually when I start the project, and it's just a bit of a joke game with the clients or with the stakeholders, I say, okay, you have a triangle of things. You have the time, no? You have all the resources, like how many people you will have, and you have the scope of the solution. And you can choose 2. If I have a duration of 3 months, and I have the people I have, and I cannot increase more, I don't have more resources, more budget, then maybe the scope will change. Or maybe you say, hey, I need to do this specific scope, and I have this amount of people. Maybe it's the timing. Maybe we will figure out by the end of the project that we need to extend a little bit more. And that's always like the typical fight in the beginning of the project, just to make things realistic, because everyone wants to know what will be delivered in terms of the scope with a fixed cost and fixed duration. But it's never the case in AI. So what happened in the past for me is that maybe I'm handling this and then doing the roadmap that will be implemented later, I figure out that we are not arriving. We are developing an AI model or I always explain this case because it was very good, with the Port of Montreal, with the operations of the Port of Montreal, the Port Authority. And we are developing the project, and maybe get the intuition that we are not arriving. We can implement the core part, which is the modeling, the data modeling, and the AI models, and we're connecting everything. But then we had assigned a last sprint to develop a very nice front end, and maybe we don't have time to do that. And then we'll create a very basic front end. So these are trade-offs that we may have in terms of a scope. Now, what happened? Let me show you something. Okay. Something. I'll just put here. Okay. Sorry, I couldn't update it. Yeah. What happened is that in general, what I do is to combine different methodologies. When you talk to agile coaches and professionals of agility, they will say that you cannot combine and change the methodologies over time. But if you do it in a pragmatic way, as an AI professional, and you care more about the value of the methodologies and the actual purity of the methodologies, what I do is to start with what we call the Kanban methodology, which is basically like a to-do list. A to-do list in which you have a series of things that you can pre-assign to people. And I'll use this during the especially the mobilization, but it could be the exploration mobilization. And I assign even tasks to people who are still not working on the project, so they are aware of the current needs, if they can spend some time pre-analyzing the data, and we are saving some time for later. So that's what happened in the beginning. And then I'm trying to use that methodology because it's more flexible. You don't need to do a planning. You don't need to use sprints, specific periods. It's just something that is ongoing until the moment we start with the kickoff, right? The moment we start with the kickoff, I start directly with sprint methodology, with Scrum methodology, which is based on the idea of sprints. Sometimes I explain a bit more of the methodology, but I'll keep it for later because I know that we have a lot of people with PM experience. But basically what I'm saying is I need to define the period of experimentation or implementation. And based on the theory, you could have sprints of 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. In my case, I do 2 weeks, and I explain why. If you do sprints of 1 week, and you have like a series of ceremonies, which are the kind of meetings that we have that are repeating over time for planning, for dailies, for review, for retros. I'll explain that later, but it's a lot of meetings. So if you do it every week, you're repeating the cycle again and again and again, and people get tired. In general, no technical team will like that. If I do 3 weeks, usually we lose control of the potential iterations. If there is something that happens that is not working well, something that is going wrong, and we need to change and to adapt during the implementation phase, 3 weeks is a wall, no? Like we can have a lot of news and things that happen during the 3 weeks. So then I go back to the 2 weeks approach because I think there's a good balance of not a lot of overload of meetings, but at the same time, the ability to plan enough activities and to have some flexibility when things change and then we need to adapt the plan. But then, and this is something that at least happens to me in some projects, is that at some moment when you are finishing the project, you are in the last part, in the last mile, you start to feel like, okay, there's not enough material to plan, either because there are not so many things left, or because there are a bit of unknowns. People are trying to spike, to research a little bit on what they are about to do. And then I switch to a sprint of 1 week. And I keep it very pragmatic, a lot of meetings, and maybe we are reducing the time for meetings. But I switch because that allows me to still plan, to work in sprints, but adapted to the amount of work that we have made. And then you will see later when we actually deliver the solution and we are doing the maintenance and we are doing the knowledge transfer and creating documentation, I come back to Kanban because it's like a to-do list. And if some team members are moving to another project, I can track things and I can say, okay, you still need to complete documentation of the data pipelines, or myself, I need to still complete a presentation to a client, etc., etc. Now, let me just check the comments and the question before I bring the other point. If you work, and this is from Dennis, if you work with a vendor, are you more of a product or program manager if you run it on your organization? If you work with a vendor, you can still be any of them, right? You can still be creating like a product approach, like a product implementation, and you rely on vendors. Assuming that by vendor, you mean like technology vendor. Or, imagine you have like external vendor, external integration company, or consulting firm that is implementing things for you. You can be the counterpart, no? You can be the project manager on your side, or you can be the product owner. So yeah, it doesn't change. It changes the team distribution and the way you will be controlling things and the ability to actually guide the implementation. If it's someone else on the vendor side that is managing the implementation, you become like a gateway and you are collaborating. Another question from Ken. What do you think of using a tool like Actionable Agile, which requires you create anticipated user stories, titles only, no estimates, to estimate the project duration? Yeah, I really like that approach, to be honest. I'm very... sometimes I work top-down, sometimes I work bottom-up. Bottom-up meaning like I'm just tracking all the micro tasks that I have in mind and the things I know that we need to do. And then I'll put a placeholder, right? Depending on the team, they may hate that, no? Because they see a story and it's empty and they say, this is not a story. And to be honest, I work more on the task level than the story. Now, because I'm the product organization of Microsoft, I need to work more on the story. I need to explain things on the end-to-end. But I like to go to the kind of detail of the task, and I'll put a very explanatory kind of title. And then I'll work with people to guide the estimation. And then when you are doing bottom-up and you have like the mini estimations of all the different tasks, you're getting more granular, more precise. You put all together and you start to get like the overall estimation, right? So I really like this example, like the Actionable Agile that you're mentioning, because it allows you to play with placeholders, and then it relies mostly on you and your ability as a manager to actually guide that discussion and to not get into the full details of things, to have the ability to estimate if we don't have the details. It's a bit of a workshop, no, estimation workshop that you have with your team. Perfect. So we have that. I don't know, and you can share your thoughts in the chat if you use different durations of a sprint. Everything is valid, and it really depends on the preferences, but that's my way to do it. What else? So we have the approaches, we have the project kickoff, we have the working agreements. Another thing that we were mentioning before is the ability to explain things in a very precise way. I mean, this is the acceptance criteria that we have in project management and whatnot, but just keep in mind that example that I was telling you, implementing something. What do we mean by implementing something? Implementing, documenting, explaining, creating a knowledge transfer to the client, creating some presentation, whatever, right? And this is very important that you define that up front and you create a proper communication style on what you are expecting. I have some recent examples, no, of tasks that are being complete engineering side, but I don't have the actual explanation or the documentation of the functionalities that we have covered. It was more of a spontaneous development, but we need to have that documentation, right? So it's very important that we confirm and document the rules and methods that we'll use with the different technical stakeholders, with the different team members, so we don't waste time. In the case that was explained before, I wasted probably like one sprint because I wasn't clear enough with my data scientist. Good question from Naomi. Have you found that your team has had to adjust how they approach estimates because their use of Cloud Code, for example, is speeding up their velocity? Very interesting question. I'm working on something, another class and a book on this topic. It's interesting because what we are seeing in general, and generalizing a lot, it depends on the case, is that the use of a tool like Cloud will accelerate, yes, the implementation of a specific task, no, especially in coding, like especially on the implementation side. But still, there are like a lot of inefficiencies on the review, on the peer review, on the previous documentation, the after documentation, etc. And then the overall team productivity hasn't changed that much. Yeah, we can prototype quickly. Me being the PM, I can create a prototype that then a developer will take over and stuff. But that's on the macro level. We see that there is not that much of a gain at team level yet because the practices and how we interact with the other team members are changing a little bit. Now, specific to the estimation or the poker planning, of course, we are considering like the actual development takes less time because they are using this kind of tools. But I don't see like a significant change on the estimations, on the natural estimations. So something we are using like, let's say, t-shirt sizes, something that was L remains L, something that was M remains M. But maybe there is something very specific, like, hey, creating like, creating the code for then training and a machine learning model. And before, if we have the data scientist, will take whatever amount of time. Of course, that part is changing a little bit. But my main conclusion is that we are not there yet in the industry in general. There are things like maybe more like a simple front end or something like that. I'm sorry, give me a second. I need just a bit of water. There are things like a more specific kind of task that maybe, yes, we say, okay, before we had to develop an entire website, now we can develop it in less time. So it's more specific. But in general terms, I haven't seen that kind of change. And it's also because I think like a lot of developers and all team members in general, a lot of organizations, they are still figuring out, no? They are trying to track the productivity in a very, how to say this, in a very rudimentary way, in the sense that we are just tracking the number of PRs that we are completing with AI. We are not entering into duration. So I think like there is still some work to do in order to become more precise in the way we are estimating. Now, continue to how. Yeah, that's a good experience, Naomi, that you have seen like that kind of change. Yeah, because there are some situations in which, yes, obviously we'll have a change on the estimations. What I have seen though is that the bottleneck instead of the development is becoming more and more the review process and the PRD or the record. Just give me a second because I really need water. I guess it's allergy season. What I was saying is that the creation of the requirements, the documentation of the story, even if we also use AI, but it's still been a bit of a bottleneck. And then the actual code review, because we have this kind of cognitive overload, no more PRs being pushed and stuff. We need to review more, and either we ignore and we are just accepting, or we actually pay attention, and then we have a lot of review activities. And then what happens is that you have a bottleneck. So that's the actual bottleneck that we are seeing, and that's why the overall duration of things is not changing that much. Now, how do I organize my work streams? And that's important also for the roadmap when we'll be creating the roadmap. Forget about the Epic. This was just a way to do it on Jira, a bad way to do it on Jira, because I use the Epics as categories of work. And basically what I was saying is that the categories of work I use are related to everything technical and not technical. Project management, I quantify my own time as a project manager with the actual tasks that we are performing. Is something that is important for the project. I need to justify it even more in these times of future work in which we need to prove that we are bringing value to the project. Then documentation, I track that separately. Instead of saying I have one task and then I'll put the criteria that you document things in addition to developing, and just creating a specific work stream and then quantifying the effort documentation. Because of course, even if we can generate documentation based on the different calls that we can have on the day-to-day, and we can extract the insights, there is still an effort of documentation. It takes time, and I need that in order to first quantify the cost of documentation, and second, calculating the remaining availability of the people based on that kind of documentation effort, right? So that's something I insist a lot. And then we'll have the different technical tracks, and you can split between data tasks and AI tasks, whatever. You can have visualization. When we were working more on business insights, it will be more on the visualization side. And the user interface design and development, I also quantify it separately, because I usually rely on designers to collaborate and whatnot. So we have that. Once again, the way you show that in your reporting or in your roadmaps, it really depends on the tool and how you organize it. It could be an Epic, it could be something else. Usually the Epic is not a way to do it, but it's something that I was using Jira. And now, imagine, and I know that it will pass a very short, like we are saying, okay, we have execute, but we haven't done that much. No, imagine we have been executing. Imagine we have been working on the different details of the project, and we are ready to deliver. Why I'm doing this is because then we'll come back on the third part. I'll be doing the live exercise in which we are actually planning and handling the sprints and the implementations, and how we show information after each sprint. But now we have the delivery. And the delivery, again, it's about being elegant. If we have implemented something in a proper way, and we are delivering that to an external party and another kind of a stakeholder within the organization, we need to make sure that things are done properly. I have seen a lot of projects on which delivery was just throwing the code or sharing the code, and then there was nothing else, right? I feel like sharing the code, of course, is the most important thing. The AI models, the different pipelines, how we transfer data, the documentation within the code. I totally agree that that's the core aspect. That then, if we are transforming data, we could have data samples from the input and the output and the models, the data transformations on the different stages. If we have pipelines, we could also have some samples so we can reconstruct that over time if we have new transformation in the future. Then the conclusions, or what we call it conclusions, is mostly, and this is related to one of the comments that you put in the chat, but today with generative AI, we can prototype things, and it will be very visual and very flashy for each sprint review that we have every 2 weeks, because we can prototype very quickly. But before, especially for other kind of projects, sometimes you won't present a model, or you won't present like an actual platform that you can demo. What you will present is just what the data scientist has been working on, which is pretty much a Jupyter notebook, and that Jupyter notebook will run some code, and then you will have some visualizations, and then best of the cases, you are explaining the rationale. So for me, documenting that during the project, during the execution, also having the sessions that explain the rationale of the different iterations. Imagine you have spent 3 weeks on the iteration for one model, explaining those stages, and usually the data scientist in that case that will be explaining that. And that helps the client understand how you are facing the different developments, why we are spending that much amount of time, and then how we're improving the performance over time. So that's also very important. The documentation, I won't repeat it anymore, but I document everything. If you are transforming data, I want you to explain how you are transforming the data, what are the data aggregations, transformations, filters that you are doing, the ATLs, ELTs, on the wall. I'm documenting everything. And then one thing that is important before we go to the post is the idea of knowledge transfer. Usually, we do knowledge transfer within organizations. We do knowledge transfer if it's something that is highly required, but most of my projects or most of the projects out there, they don't do this kind of knowledge transfer. Any AI project is, of course, an opportunity to learn for the people involved, but also for the different stakeholders, clients or internal teams. So what I have done in a few projects, mine, was to plan some buffer time by the end of the project so people can work maybe a couple of days to prepare a very academic session. If there is something that is related to data science and is about improving data sources that are missing information, reducing the dimensionality of the data, optimizing the feature store that we are using as an input for the models, I want them to explain that, and assuming that there are different people who will retake that project on the client, they have also technical people, I use it as a learning opportunity. And then I document that, no? And I keep the track of that. And we have a video itself for new people joining the project in the future. And I don't know, I like it because it develops also that idea of expertise of the team. It's not only one person presenting, it's the entire team presenting. Technical profiles can be also developing their presentation skills. I mean, so a lot of technical people are wonderful presenters, especially PhD students. They have been presenting their entire life, but it's also good for them to develop the ability to explain very complex topics in very simple words. And then you train also the clients and the potential users because they are understanding the logic behind the decision-making of the AI tool. Right? So it has a lot of advantages. But of course, it takes time. It has a cost on the project, and you need to see upfront if you can actually leverage that, or you can actually do that. No. Let me just check, because we have the time. We'll probably do a pause very soon. Oh, yeah. One question from Rachel on the Q&A part. We have, how do teams distribute across different time zones and geography locations, collaborate effectively on AI projects, and how does this differ from cross time zone collaboration on traditional projects? I feel like I'm very biased because I had recent experience, and obviously it's more complex to handle different locations and time zones. What I mean, my answer will be very obvious to this. Like what I try to do is to structure the activities in a way that creates some continuity. If I need some input from one location for the others to retake, I try to structure like that. And sometimes it's just a matter of, the idle time between activities. If you have high dependencies between different people in different locations, it will be very high. So it's not very efficient. So I cannot give you like an absolute answer, and especially with my recent experience, I felt like it was very difficult to synchronize that. Is mostly about the time zones, because obviously you have someone who is starting their day at 7 a.m. and then we have other people who are finishing their day at 8 p.m. and they are super tired. Any kind of live discussion won't be very efficient. But what I do is leveraging asynchronous. Asynchronous, obviously, discussions, trying to make sure that those discussions are being on the proper channel, because in big environments, people will be talking about different things by email, by Teams, by Slack, etc. So I try to unify discussions. And from the project management perspective, making sure that every discussion gets some continuity. If it's an important topic, there's some continuity, and the question or the topic or the blocker gets solved. Okay, I'm just checking different chats to see if we have something else. Okay, perfect. So just a quick comment before we go on the pause and before we go the roadmap exercise, which is my favorite. same as you have the readout, the kickoff, you have the final readout, which is basically a way to finalize. You have the final meeting, you explain what you have done, you demo the thing, you explain the results, all the learnings and whatnot. If you remember when we were talking about the inter-use case roadmap, and I'll put it on the screen again, we were saying like, okay, we are planning not only one use case, but the other use cases. You had already the idea up front of the potential next project that you will do after the first one. And maybe during the project, during the use case one, you realize that actually the best candidate is use case 3. And then what you're trying to do, especially if it's in a commercial context in which you need to get support to bring or to implement new projects, or you need new sponsor, what you try to do is to explain the results. Hopefully they are good, because otherwise no one will trust the team to implement other projects. And then present the preliminary idea of the next project. I do that on the same meeting. It's unexpected. In general, people, they are not expecting that you are presenting another project, but if you bring that continuity and you are able as a project manager to explain that the data sources that you have curated and improved are already ready, 80% of the data that you need is already there, that your team has developed experience with, I don't know, Google Vertex, and they had never used it, and now they are using it and they feel comfortable, and that the team is available, the people are available to work on this, even if some members may be changing, but maybe you have that ability not to keep them there. Then you're explaining that the next use case will be a bit more efficient, obviously, because they less of a learning process. So that's an important thing that you probably want to do by the end of your projects. Now, I'm just checking if there was another question. We are good, we're clean. I think I haven't forgotten other questions. If not, you can tell me. But now what we'll do, I'll put the timer, and this time we'll do a 10-minute break because we have time. And after that, we'll be doing the live exercise in which I explain you basically how I do it, how I work and stuff. So now you see the timer. Yes, we have 10 minutes. I'll get some water that I needed, and I'll see you back here. Okay, we're back now, and we'll retake the last exercise that we were mentioning, no? That will be creating a live roadmap for an AI project. It will be an illustrative one. We won't go into the most complex project that we could imagine, or yes, depending on what you want. But we'll be illustrating things in the screen. You will have the material that you'll get. You will have different examples, accumulate examples I create over time, and you will get the sense of what we do with this kind of roadmap. But let me just go directly and share the screen. Fit. Perfect. Once again, when I share the screen like this and I'm modifying a PDF or a PPT in this case, I cannot see if you are writing something in the chat, but it's fine. I'll come back to that. So this exercise is based on the idea of a roadmap template. In my case, I use a very simple template. Actually, I use this template. I created probably the first version in 2017 or something like that. I have been iterating, but I like to keep this kind of template. Why? Because I know that we can create automated roadmaps with Jira and with all these platforms. But it's also true that it forced me to think about all the details that are required for a project. And if I don't know the details, to go and explore it with the different team members addressing that. So let's see what we do. For now, what I'm saying is, okay, we have like let's say a relatively short project. Maybe we have like a 3 sprints, regular sprints, 5 sprints, let's say, between 8 and 10 weeks. We are assuming that we keep a buffer by the end. So maybe it's 8 plus 2 weeks. And then what we are doing is structuring the categories of work. No, we have the preparation of the data sources, of the collection, all the modeling, all the pro engineering or context engineering, whatever, depending on the technology will be different. All the design activities, for example, it could be design and any other thing. And the interviews, maybe with the users, and then deployment, integration, testing. No, whatever the categories are is based on how we want to organize our project. And there are different ways to do it, right? So let me just start. Because here what we are saying is, okay, let's imagine that we want to create an AI application. I'm saying a chatbot, but because it was the most intuitive way that we can illustrate this exercise, but we could do something else. And we say it's a chatbot for an existing website. It will be answering questions to a specific industry domain X. And, we have a website that is used by SMEs, meaning that they are knowledge about their topic. And we want to have something that is easy to deploy, that we are privileging something that will be pragmatic. We are not developing or deploying our own models. We are trying to leverage things that exist already, and we want to be fairly quick to implement more than a prototype, like an MVP. And let's assume that the domain, because I say domain X like as a variable, but let's assume that the domain is insurance, high stakes, like something important, regulated, on which you could have problems if you make a mistake, etc., etc. So let me just start with the exercise. Now, what you see on the bottom, maybe a bit small, but you'll see later a bit bigger. But what you see is that I'm trying to categorize also the type of work. If it's something that is more infra, cloud engineering, administrator, or if it's something more data scientist, engineer, I know that it's different, but I'm just trying to bundle things. Data engineer, machine learning engineer, development and QA, and maybe all the PM activities plus all the design activities, right? So we can put it here, PM, design, and all the interviews that goes with. Okay, so if we start and we say it will be like a VAP, just trying to say that it will be like a very high quality chatbot for insurance clients, regulated industry. And I'll explain why it is important, the regulated industry, from a project management perspective. So let's start. Let's say, okay, obviously we have been talking about the different data sources. You remember the list of data sources. We selected those that are important. And then we are working with our people. I'm saying our people as a team to prepare those data sources. So in general terms, again, it depends on the skills and type of roles that you have in the company. But in general terms, that would be more of a PM kind of thing. So basically, you are saying, okay, I have the PM, the data engineer, sorry, and it's a soft green or whatever this color is, like gray, greenish. And what we are saying is that maybe in the beginning of the sprint, or maybe even before a little bit, because we have been working on the mobilization, we are basically doing the data preparation, aggregation, preparation, cleaning, aggregation, plus creating the feature store, basically choosing the characteristics that are important for a prediction. No, if I'm predicting something, it has to be based on the specific conditions. So let me just go here, put it here. Okay, feature store V1, no, because maybe we are iterating. So I'm just putting this here. Perfect. So we have that, and I'll get another color because we are saying, okay, at the same time, and this is where I want you to start illustrating the dependencies, which I usually illustrate with these red lines. What we have is also, we're starting a bit before, a few days before, and the cloud engineer or the cloud admin is creating the specific subscription, enabling cloud environment, adding members, etc. So this is just an example of when we are starting, and we are saying, okay, the data engineers, maybe they have started working like, it's more of a manual work. They are not using the cloud infrastructure. They are using their laptops, or they are using whatever kind of tools. But at some moment, you have to have an environment. No, we are saying that it's a very pragmatic implementation. We have that. And maybe you say, okay, we have prepared this, and then what we want to do is to add final data input for ML/DL model. Well, no, we are saying that it's a chatbot. Any case, add final data knowledge base, like a repository of things, and we want to add it to a data lake, for example, in our Azure environment. And I'll say, okay, we are adding this. It's by the end of the data work, we are preparing everything, and we will activate some RBAC mechanism. So basically the access based on the role and whatnot. No? And obviously you have a dependency. For example, we are saying this, it has to be once this environment is available, because we are saying that the data knowledge base will be on the data lake, and the data lake is here. Okay, so we have that. One of the things I do the most of the times for this project is that I'll get, and probably if I'm the PM plus designer, or I'm the PM and I'm working with a proper designer, I'll start create initial mock-ups of the UI, to illustrate the thing. In this case, it's a chatbot, so there is not that much of a user interface, UI user interface, but we're creating this, and we are trying to see how it will look, and the website, in this case, is the website. And if relevant, I'll do user interviews. In this case, could be, okay, we have a selection of VIP clients, and they want to contribute and to tell you the kind of information that they want to find when they use this kind of chatbot. No, so you are getting input, and you are working based on that. Okay. Now, because we are saying we have this, let's work with the AI engineer in this case, because we will be using LLM. It's a former data scientist. Now they're moving to more AI engineering. And we'll have also like a dependency with the platform, because that AI engineer is deploying or deploying the LLMs via cloud platform. And once again, it can be Bedrock, Foundry, Vertex, whatever, right? And they are deploying the models, they are testing that they can deploy it because they got the accesses, and they are starting with that. And then at the same time, they are testing baseline models. Imagine they're just doing the test on the baseline models without any kind of data, right? The data is about to be ready, but they are doing that. And then what you're saying is, okay, maybe because a chatbot, what you'll assume is that you will have a RAG pattern, which is basically the model with the data that you are using in order to spot answers, no? And you obviously rely on this data. You obviously rely, let's say, on the deployment of the LLMs, and you have these dependencies. And once you have that, you can basically create RAG pattern based on data lake plus vector store. A vector store simply is a different kind of database in which you can represent information in a numerical way, because machines are better to do that. So maybe you say, okay, we are deploying vector store database, because that wasn't part of the scope initially agreed. And you may say, okay, who is doing this? Is this the engineer? Maybe is the cloud admin? So basically, you can say like, we realize that the cloud admin, we move to the other category, and we have that. Okay, so we are starting with this, and at the same time, I think I forgot to add like pure development activities. So let me just put it here, and I'll just put it here, dev, and we have the devs and the QA, right? And we may have QA testing of initial RAG pattern, and we can put it here. And at the same time, maybe we are working in parallel, and let me just put it smaller to illustrate the thing. But basically, we are saying, okay, during this time, because we have the developers available, maybe, and I'll put it like this, I'll just move this to the front, and I'll just put this more visible. So maybe we are saying here we are developing in the, updated UI, and me, because I'm the PM, and maybe I didn't know, but the developers say, okay, the front-end developers say, no, actually it will be like just one sprint, but we'll include some testing, initial testing. So, okay, we are doing that. Testing, and then maybe you say, okay, we are actually integrating the engine because we have the UI, but it's empty. We don't have the development. We are integrating this with that, and you start to see the dependencies. No, and obviously you need to align. If you have different people, you have different roles on how we are doing this. Let's say that you get the user interviews and you get some official testing, and let's say that you do some user side testing plus new iteration of feedback, and PM, whatever this product or project, but PM, you bring that additional feedback, and what you are saying is, okay, we will be creating a new version of this. For some reason, we didn't include the Q&A, so maybe we realize that document Q&A and make available as PDF file for the RAG version 2. Okay, and we have that, and we are working on that in parallel with the data engineer, and then we have the feedback, and then we are integration of RAG into website. And then that was repeated. And then what we are saying, okay, we are creating a second version of the rack v2 into the website, blah, 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 blah. And again, you have the dependencies, and obviously we are planning this in a sprint by sprint way. So if we have something on the middle, how we can align. So we have something that concludes during the sprint, and then we can start doing the sprint, and then we have another dependency, and it's more people involved, right? And it could be anything else. By the end of the project, we could say, okay, we are creating like a additional deployments by geography. Why is this important? And this is the kind of high level view that you need to have as a PM. We are saying that it's a regulated environment, right? We are saying that it's the insurance clients. It's a B2C scenario, individuals with their data privacy, regulated industry. And for sure, maybe you are not an expert in insurance, I'm not, but you know that in this case, they will have considerations in terms of data privacy, data protection. So we decide to do additional deployments, and the additional deployments mean data plus development plus AI models. If you are implementing the AI models from different platforms, you can choose the geography, and you are doing that by geography. And you say, okay, we will be working with the admin to do that for US, then Canada, then UK, then European Union, and China, let's say. Don't feel offended if I'm not adding the rest of geographies. It's just for illustrative examples. So basically what we're saying is that we are creating additional deployments. In an intuitive way, we are cutting the data in different pieces. So the data from Europeans is in Europe, the data from Canadians is in Canada, whatever. And then they will have an impact on the rest, right? Because we need to test. So probably what we are doing is, okay, we are creating that, an evolution of this, and it will be rack v3, but I'll call it like rack v3 into website by geography, right? And you are getting a new step there, a new version, and you try to do some, in general with the QAs, you need to do new testing in order to guarantee that, because we have split everything, new testing with QAs, because we have split everything, that we are not destroying anything, right? And maybe we get a last iteration of final testing, and we say, okay, the final testing is positive. The users are saying like, it's great, it's working pretty well. Final testing plus okay. And then you are spending the last week or the last sprint, in this case, because I'm putting together sprint 4 and 5 because I didn't have space, but we are doing like a final documentation plus knowledge transfer, and the data engineer is coming back and is working on the updated automated final pipelines. And then you are with the admin and is sharing access, let's say sharing access to infra for stakeholders, clients, whoever is retaking the project, right? So this is a very illustrative way. Let me come back because I cannot see the studio and I cannot see if you are saying anything. Let me just check here. Okay, let me stop sharing and I'll go back to the question before I bring the other point. Okay, that's fine. I answered to this question. Yeah, perfect. So let me bring back the other screen. Here. Imagine you are working on that roadmap. Obviously, I have done it in a very high level way. When I'm working with the team members, what I like to do is to bring an idea, an opinion of if I have knowledge to bring the opinion, but to bring the opinion of what the sequence of things could be, how we could implement things. Why I do that? Not because I know more than them. Obviously, I know less, but I like to see the reaction of people when you bring already an idea of a roadmap. in general, people, if they are not contributing to the creation of the roadmap, at least they feel entitled to criticize it, to say, hey, this activity will take more time, this activity is not required, this is not correct, and that. So I usually prepare that by my side as a PM. Then I meet the team and we start the creative destruction. They are destroying my roadmap. And that's totally okay, because then you are just selecting the arrows, you are changing the durations, you change the sequence, you hear what they are saying, you are adding the details that we are missing, etc., etc. But let's assume that roadmap is more or less okay. And then what we want to go back is to the estimation of the people who will be involved. Assuming that you are doing this roadmap during the mobilization or during the beginning of the exploration phase. Let me just come back and reshare the other screen. Perfect. So, in a very intuitive way, and simplifying a lot, but it's also a way to start getting some sense or making some sense of things. If we have, let's say, data engineer, let's assume that is one person. We don't have more data engineers in the company. And then that person is working more or less in parallel for a couple of tasks, but then won't be involved for the rest. Maybe we're telling him or her that he needs to document more things, so it's taking a bit more time. Maybe we realize that we need a bit more of time here, that we need to add some margin, classic PM stuff, right? And then we say, okay, we have more or less, here's like one entire sprint with these two activities, and then we have 1 week, another week, so we could have a bit more than 2 weeks, one sprint. Let's say one, like just to keep some margin, 5 weeks. Okay, 5 weeks out of 10 weeks. So it's like a 50%, sorry. And then we go back to the template, if I find it. Perfect. And I say data engineer will be one person, pipelines, data prep, doc, etc. And it will be max, because it was less than 50%, but it will be 50%. Okay, we have that for the data engineer. Let me see for the QI and the designer and the sponsor. Let me just find this back. So we were saying that we did some QA, quality assurance here and there, but they are working in a more ad hoc way. Maybe they are spending 2 weeks of work, and the sponsor will be like a total of 1 week of work. And what else? We were saying like the designer is working, okay, maybe just on the beginning, it will be 1 week, no? So we have 4 weeks, let's say. And that's a total of 40% for a 10-week effort. So we are going back to the, once again, if I find it, yes. So it's 3 people, mix of activities, and then it will be the equivalent of a CO.4 FT, like a full-time employee. No? So we are saying like they're the equivalent altogether of this. And I'll explain why I'm grouping like this. Now we have the AI engineer and developer. Okay, we go back to the roadmap, and I say, okay, AI developer, which, like the AI engineer, which was mostly this. Obviously, we'll have more time than just these 2 or 3 weeks, but let's assume that that's the case. 3 weeks of the AI engineer and the developer, because more of a development kind of project, will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, let's say. Okay, so we have 3 and 6. So we'll just do it like that. We are adding some margin. Obviously, we go into details, but we are saying 2 people. And then we are saying like a 6. That will be like a 0 plus 0.3 FT, right? And then we have the cloud engineer or admin, depending on the case. And then you could have like a total of 1 week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks and a half, let's say, just to keep a different number. 4 weeks and a half out of 10. So we are coming back, and it's just one person. 4 weeks, so 0.45 FTs. Now, why we are doing this, right? What's the goal of doing this kind of exercise? Let's assume that you are in charge as a project manager. You may be in charge also of the budget, no, of the justification of how many people you need, how much it will cost for you to have these people, etc., etc. So here, if you assume that all of them they have the same salary, which is obviously not the case, or you go into details of the different salaries and the education, if you assume that they are getting 100K, 200K, 300K, I don't care, then you can do the calculation. And here we have the equivalent of, I'll put it in the same. What we are saying is that we have 0.4, 0.5, 0.9. So this is 9918, and then 18225. No, you have a 225. If I'm not wrong, but I may be wrong because it's Thursday and the brain starts to be a bit tired. 225 FTEs, and then you are saying that the cost per year, assuming that they are getting 200K, whatever the currency is, between 52, we assume that is the cost per week, and then we are just multiplying the number of people by the period and the dedication, right? And we are saying like, okay, we have 10 weeks, whatever. I'm not checking the number right now, I may be wrong, but this is the idea. We are going to details of the different people based on the preliminary estimation of this kind of roadmap. Now, why use this instead of, or initially at least, because then I do the exercise, obviously, with the backlog, the estimation, we go granular. But if you're in the beginning of the project, the idea is that if you get access to this, and I'm not saying that this one is, let me just share the screen, that this one is super visual. It's just loading the screen. Just give it a couple of seconds. For some reason, it's taking its time. Okay, now. This kind of visual, if it was properly done and with time and in an elegant way, this is something I can show to the technical team. And once again, we engage on the discussion and the criticizing of different durations and the sequence of things. And that's great because that's the actual goal, to make sure that we are capturing all the information. And then I can also show it during the project kickoff. If you remember when we were saying we have a list of resources, of people, tools, budget that we need. And during the kickoff, we want to talk to all the stakeholders and we want to explain them the impact of things. If they don't bring the data, if they don't bring the infrastructure. It happened to me, let me just try to make it visual. It happened to me at some moment, I was working on a project. And there was a client that same as right now, no? Like everyone wants to do generative AI. At the time, it was deep learning. And we were planning to do machine learning plus deep learning if possible, just to compare, whatever. That client was very interested, to say in an elegant way, in having something with deep learning, right? Because, okay, it was the best option. You have a lot of data, you have a lot of computing and stuff. And that person insisted a lot, but then when I took a look and I was saying, okay, we are verifying on the checklist all the different aspects, no? When we were mentioning before of the scientific approach, the technical resources, the data, etc., etc. They didn't have GPUs, for example, the graphic cards that we use for video games, also for training models, right? They didn't have that, so it wasn't technically feasible. And they insist, they wanted to have that as an output of the project. So I say, okay, before we start the project, you need to create or to give us that infrastructure, whatever the infrastructure is, your server, access to the cloud, whatever. If not, that means that this part, I'll put in red, like a huge risk, this part will be delayed, right? Will be delayed because if we are starting to create all the infrastructure and set up the environment and stuff, we cannot really deploy assuming that that was the case for this project, but we're talking about a different project. We couldn't start with AI modeling. If we cannot start with AI modeling, then that means that we are moving the AI modeling. If we are moving the AI modeling, the testing. If we are moving the testing, the iterations, and etc., etc. You see the pattern. If we are not able to, do things in time, then we need to explain that upfront. We need to say, yes, we are running out of time. We don't have all the resources that we needed. That means that either we cut the scope or we change the duration, but that will have a cost. And that's the kind of discussion I have with them to align the expectations. There is something that I haven't added to this presentation, but could be also interesting. But is related to the aligning expectation, that we were mentioning before. Is the idea of aligning expectations in terms of technical performance. And this is related also to experimentation stages, the iterations that we can have with the team and whatnot. People start to be a bit more realistic about the expectations. We know that AI models are pure statistics, and it won't be like a perfect model in any case. They are not perfect AI models. But the expectation of people will be like, hey, it should work well most of the times, 99%, 98%. Sometimes depending on the project, on the model, or the use case, that's impossible, right? We will always find new stuff, we'll find issues, and I think that that's something that we need to explain. So something that I explain is the notion of good enough for the purpose, right? If I'm classifying images for Google Photos, for example, if I'm wrong, I classify a picture of my father and I put another person, it's not too critical, right? But if I'm classifying images for healthcare, in that case, it's a problem. Imagine I'm classifying pneumonia or non-pneumonia, and I have a false positive or a false negative. That's going to create a problem. So in that case, we're talking about different levels of good enough. And in that case, I use the technical metrics. I mentioned F1 score. You could have accuracy, precision, recall, other metrics that are explained in the book. But basically, you are using that technical metric to explain to the stakeholders and to figure out what's good enough. Now, at the same time, you can explain that reaching a 95% will take a huge amount of time. You say, okay, we want this chatbot to be perfect. We'll need a version 2, and we'll need a version 2, we'll need a version 3, a version 4, and therefore we'll have different iterations, multiple rack iterations, and that will take more time, and therefore there will be a cost. And you engage on this kind of discussion. And usually when you show this and you show the impact of these kind of decisions, people understand. People understand that there are limitations, that there are trade-offs that we need to make. Same for the case I was saying with especially data scientists. I'm generalizing a little bit, but they like to improve, to continue iterating, to improve the performance of the models. When I'm working here, imagine it was a different kind of project. What I'll create is, imagine that this is the iterations, and then I'll create an internal roadmap with the different iterations. And I'll force a discussion on what are we doing with those iterations. Again, it's improving the data, better data, is improving the parameters, is whatever, right? And we have an iteration roadmap. And that's also a granular level that you can reach if you have the discussion with your teams. Granular, right? Okay, let me just check one more time on the chat. Yeah, Dante, you're right. I make it easy, but it seems complicated. It's complicated. I mean, it depends on a lot of discussions. Actually, just having the ability to just put everything together takes time. That means that a lot of things. If I show you what I use at work, it's like this, but crowded by 3. And then you need to go and verify that this is right, to make sure that people are bringing their opinion, because sometimes people will agree. And then you realize in the project that, hey, they didn't say anything because they were polite or they weren't paying attention. And finally, they say, hey, this integration of the rack wasn't at all 1 week. It was way more. And then you have a problem after. And it takes also some experience, in terms of knowing the task and the estimation of things. And even myself, I can have all the experience I want, but sometimes I'll do wrong estimations most of the times, right? So that's why it requires a lot of discussion. Okay, let me stop sharing the screen. I'll share a last, I think, recommendation before we finish here. And for that, I'll use just a bit of a joke, but no joke, is what I created as part of the book too, is the Atrium framework, because everyone likes to have a framework with their name. So I try to make it work in both English and French. Basically, this framework is just to identify the things that, like the kind of skills that are related to what, in my opinion, an AI project manager should be. The kind of skills, hard soft skills, mostly soft skills that they need, and the kind of actions that you need to have during your iterations with the different stakeholders in order to make a project successful. The impact of a good AI project manager or product owner or product manager makes a lot of difference, because a lot of things, they are not visible, a lot of things they are not simple to justify, but when they work well, you can see the impact. So what's my vision on that? I think obviously the ability to analyze things continuously, right? You are the day-to-day, you are listening on the dailies, you are having all the ceremonies, the team is explaining things, and you are continuously listening, tracking, and analyzing. And that takes brain power, right? You need to be sharp, and you need to pay attention. Obviously, with AI, we can capture a lot of things nowadays with Zoom and Teams, but we need to be analyzing in order to find a way to solve some kind of situations and problems that we may have. We need the ability to define things, to define the scope of things, to explain the trade-offs, to explain the expected kind of functionalities. That's more a product management kind of skill, but still you need that ability. And that's a mix of technical skills, but also high level or big picture that you develop, in which you are combining the technical considerations with the actual user needs. You need the ability to go and find the resources, resources in the projects. And that's a mix of political considerations in the organization, quantifying things. When I show you that I'm quantifying a 0.45, is because I feel when we are more precise, if we are doing a good estimation, the stakeholders, clients, people funding the initiative on your company, they will see that it's more realistic than just asking for a full time of everyone. So that's an important thing. Involving, no one likes to follow instructions, right? They are not agents; they are humans, and involving them on the preliminary stages. That's why I was saying on the exploration and the mobilization phase, I try to bring the team, even if they are not fully available, but so they have already something to say. They can bring their opinion on the data, on the models, the technical approach. Finding the agreement, finding the agreement, you will have a lot of opinions. Today, I was talking to some colleagues, and we were saying every time we bring a potential option, everyone will have an opinion. So you need to find the ability to get together all these opinions and find an agreement. And you need to navigate things. Most of the times in this kind of implementation, something goes wrong. Either we overestimated the capacity of the team, or we thought that one model will be good and we had to reboot a little bit and to test different approaches. This is complex, no? We were saying all these variety of skills that we need as project managers. And for that, you have that mix of communication, having good communication skills, a proper planning ability, right? Being very organized, planning things up front, same as any other project. The big picture, no? You are able to combine different activities from the different team members, different needs from the users, and you keep in mind any kind of contextual information that is important. Your own organization, no? The ability to organize things and to show that to the rest. The persuasion and the proactivity to convince people, no? Because in general, you'll be competing for resources with other people within your organization. That happens all the time. So you have to remember something individual level is this kind of Atrium framework, but mostly the kind of skills that you may have already, or maybe you continue developing them, because obviously this is something that It takes time. By the end of the material, you'll see that we have different recommendations. I usually explain my experiences. I realized that a mission-oriented project, for example, they change the game. When you are facing difficulties and politics and blockers, when you have an actual mission-oriented project, and I had one with during the pandemic to bring with an AI tool to spot the mask and gloves and stuff and accelerate the delivery of these to the pharmacies, everyone was collaborating. So you realize that most of the blockers are usually human politics and human discussions and not the actual technical capability. Educating the stakeholders, once again, explaining things, creating training sessions, it really helps with the adoption and the collaboration. No one wants to accept something if they are not involved and they don't understand the logic of it. It's as simple as that. I remember interviewing for a report people from the former team of Google Maps, and they will explain that people didn't want to use Google Maps initially at the same scale because they couldn't understand the logic of the recommendations. They got the signal from the users and they improved it, and they created the rationale when they were explaining the results, and then they saw that people were actually adopting more happily. And obviously, you need executive leadership to be supporting you, because otherwise you will have a lot of blockers and new needs, and you need someone to make a decision when things are going bad. But you can check that later. You have the access not only to a recording, but also to deck. I'll finish with, I think there's another question from Dante. Thank you for the participation. Do you recommend any communication tool as Slack, Notion, Google? This is my personal opinion. Obviously at work I use Teams and stuff. But I like a lot of Slack for asynchronous collaboration. I think in a chat-based discussion, Slack is very good. For live discussions, I personally prefer Teams because it summarizes very well the actions and capture the information and map it to the rest of things that you may have in a PowerPoint and a SharePoint. So for me, it works better than other solutions, but this is probably a biased opinion. And then I like Jira for project management quite a lot. I like Confluence and Similar for documentation. Code repositories, I use GitHub, but I had used GitLab, Bitbucket, etc. So it's just a matter of choosing something that works well for you and for your team. Sometimes you have the ability to choose. Sometimes it will be the team that tells you, hey, I like this other tool. I remember one team telling me, I like a ClickUp. And ClickUp at that time wasn't, in my opinion, good enough to structure the work on the stream and sprints, but they were happy with that. They were documenting things, they were delivering time. So they say, okay, I'll adapt myself to their preferences. Okay, so I feel like that's all. It's always very short for me, 3 hours, because I could be talking about this the entire day. But thank you for your attention. Thank you for the active participation and all the invitations and everything that you have been sharing in the chat. Happy to stay connected. And once again, thank you and have a very nice day. And thank you, Brittany.
All right. Thank you so much, Adrian, and everyone for attending our course. We hope they benefited from the live course and hope to see you on other O'Reilly live courses in the future. Our feedback survey will open up in just a few moments. We'd love your thoughts. Thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye, everyone.